This was the Socorro incident, the day the world changed forever.
He was chasing a speeding teenager through the dusty streets of Socorro when an explosion shattered the desert silence and a pillar of blue flame erupted from the canyon. What Police Sergeant Lonnie Zamora discovered next would make him the most credible UFO witness in American history and leave investigators baffled for decades. It was April 24, 1964, a typical Friday afternoon in Socorro, New Mexico, a small desert town of about 6,000 souls nestled in the high desert valley along the Rio Grande. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the adobe buildings and dusty streets where tumbleweeds rolled lazily in the warm spring breeze. Lonnie Zamora was 31 years old, a respected police sergeant with the Socorro Police Department, known throughout the community as a solid, no-nonsense lawman who didn't drink, didn't make up stories, and took his job seriously. He had served the town for 7 years, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity that made him one of the most trusted figures in local law enforcement. On this particular afternoon around 5:45, Zamora was pursuing a black Chevrolet sedan driven by a local teenager who had been speeding through town, a routine traffic stop that should have been the most exciting thing to happen that day. He was heading south on Old Rodeo Street, his patrol car gaining on the Chevy, when suddenly a loud roar split the air, followed by what sounded like an explosion coming from the southwest, from the direction of the dynamite shack about a half-mile away in the rocky desert. Zamora's first thought was that the shack had exploded, possibly with workers inside, and his duty to protect lives immediately overrode his pursuit of a speeding teenager. He abandoned the chase, radioing dispatch to report a possible explosion at the dynamite storage area, and turned his black-and-white Ford Cruiser onto a rough dirt road that led toward the arroyo where the sound had originated. The road was barely more than a rocky trail, forcing Zamora to slow to a crawl as his vehicle bounced over stones and ruts, the suspension groaning with each jolt. As he crested a small hill, struggling to get his car up the steep incline, he caught his first glimpse of something that didn't belong in the New Mexico desert. About 150 to 200 yards away, down in a shallow gully filled with mesquite and greasewood bushes, sat an object that Zamora first thought was an overturned car, shiny and white in the afternoon sun. Next to it stood two figures dressed in what appeared to be white coveralls, and Zamora assumed they were occupants of the wrecked vehicle. One of the figures seemed to turn and look directly at him, and Zamora got the impression of surprise, though he was too far away to see facial features clearly. The figures appeared small, either children or small adults. Zamora couldn't be certain at that distance. He continued maneuvering his patrol car over the rough terrain, keeping his eyes on the scene below, trying to find a way down into the gully to render assistance. When he finally positioned his car where he could get a clear view, what he saw made his blood run cold and contradicted everything he thought he knew about the possible. The object was not an overturned car. It was egg-shaped or oval, sitting on what appeared to be metal legs or supports, smooth and shiny like polished aluminum with no visible seams, rivets, or welds. The craft was about 15 feet long and perhaps 6 to 8 feet high, sitting perfectly level on the uneven desert floor. On the side facing him, Zamora could clearly see a red insignia or marking, a vertical line with a horizontal bar beneath it, and a curved line above like an arrow pointing upward with a sort of crescent moon on top. The two figures he had seen were now gone, vanished as if they had never been there, though Zamora had only taken his eyes off them for seconds while navigating the rough ground. Before he could process what he was seeing, a roar erupted from the object, not the explosive boom he had heard earlier, but a steady loud roar that went from low pitch to high, like a jet engine spooling up. At the same moment, blue and orange flames shot from the underside of the craft, not like rocket exhaust, but more like individual flames of blue and orange, very bright and intense, extending maybe 3 or 4 feet toward the ground.
The roar was deafening, changing in frequency as it grew louder, and Zamora felt genuine fear for the first time in his law enforcement career. His training told him to investigate, but every instinct screamed danger. He was close enough that if this thing exploded or fell over, he could be killed or seriously injured.
The object began to rise, slowly at first, the flames underneath pushing it up off the desert floor, while the legs or landing gear retracted or disappeared. Zamora couldn't tell which through the glare of the flames. The roar continued, loud enough that Zamora worried his eardrums might burst, and he turned and ran back toward his patrol car, stumbling over rocks and nearly falling in his haste to put distance between himself and whatever this thing was. As he ran, he knocked his glasses off, which clattered onto the rocks, but he didn't stop to retrieve them. He reached his car and dove beside it, using the vehicle for cover, certain that the object was about to explode and wanting something solid between him and the blast. He crouched there for several seconds, listening to the roar continue, then begin to diminish. When silence finally returned to the desert, broken only by the ticking of his car's engine and his own heavy breathing, Zamora cautiously looked over the hood of his cruiser. The object was now airborne, rising silently with no visible means of propulsion, no flames, no exhaust, nothing but the smooth, egg-shaped craft moving upward and southward, parallel to the ground about 10 to 15 feet in the air. It cleared the nearby dynamite shack by about 3 feet, Zamora noted with the trained observation of a police officer documenting a scene, then accelerated rapidly toward the southwest, following the contour of the hills. Within seconds it had disappeared from view, moving so fast that Zamora couldn't track it with his eyes. The entire encounter had lasted perhaps 60 seconds, from when he first saw the flames to when the object vanished over the hills. But those 60 seconds would haunt Lonnie Zamora for the rest of his life and ignite one of the most intensive UFO investigations in American history. Zamora stood alone in the desert silence, his heart pounding, his hands shaking, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. He retrieved his glasses, got back in his patrol car, and immediately radioed the dispatcher, his voice shaky as he reported what had happened. The dispatcher, recognizing the genuine distress in Zamora's usually calm voice, immediately contacted New Mexico State Police Sergeant Sam Chavez, who was patrolling nearby. Chavez arrived within minutes, finding Zamora visibly shaken, pale and sweating despite the mild temperature. Zamora led Chavez down into the gully to the spot where the object had been, and both men examined the evidence left behind. There were 4 wedge-shaped depressions in the hard desert soil, arranged in a roughly square pattern, about 12 to 15 feet apart, each depression several inches deep, and pressed into ground so hard that it would have taken tremendous weight to create such marks. In the center of the 4 marks was a burned area, roughly circular, where the greasewood bushes were still smoldering, their green branches charred and smoking. The burning was concentrated in several spots rather than one continuous area, which matched what Zamora had described about seeing multiple blue and orange flames rather than a single exhaust plume. Chavez photographed the scene with his personal camera, while Zamora sketched the layout of the landing marks and described every detail he could remember about the object and the 2 figures. Both officers searched the area for footprints from the figures Zamora had seen, but the rocky ground revealed nothing definitive, just some disturbed stones and scuff marks that could have been anything. By early evening, word of the incident had spread through Socorro, and curious townspeople began arriving at the site. The sheriff's department cordoned off the area to preserve the evidence, and within hours, investigators from multiple agencies descended on the small desert town. The Air Force's Project Blue Book, the official military investigation into UFO reports, sent Major Hector Quintanilla Jr. and Sergeant David Moody to interview Zamora and examine the landing site.
They arrived expecting to debunk another misidentification or hoax, but what they found challenged their assumptions. Lonnie Zamora's reputation as a reliable, sober, honest police officer was impeccable. His colleagues, his superiors, the townspeople, even the local judge vouched for his character without hesitation. He wasn't the type to make up stories or seek attention. He didn't drink, didn't use drugs, had no history of mental illness or instability. He was simply a conscientious cop who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps the right place at the right time, depending on your perspective. Major Quintanilla interviewed Zamora extensively, trying to find holes in his story or alternative explanations for what he had seen. Could it have been a helicopter? No, Zamora insisted. It made no sound like a helicopter, had no rotors, and moved in ways no helicopter could move. Could it have been some kind of experimental aircraft from White Sands Missile Range, located about 75 miles to the south? Quintanilla checked with White Sands and was told that no tests were conducted in that area on that date, and certainly nothing that matched the description of what Zamora had seen. Could it have been a weather balloon, a prank, a misidentified natural phenomenon? Each possibility was examined and rejected based on the physical evidence and Zamora's detailed testimony. The landing marks were real, photographed and measured by multiple investigators. The burned vegetation was real. Samples were collected and analyzed.
The timing was documented through police radio logs. Sergeant Chavez had arrived shortly after the object departed and confirmed the fresh burns and the heat still radiating from the scorched bushes. Other witnesses came forward who had heard the roar or seen something unusual in the sky at approximately the same time, though none had been as close as Zamora or seen as much detail. One witness, a tourist traveling on Highway 85 about a mile away, reported seeing a bluish flame rising from the ground in the direction of the sighting at the same time Zamora encountered the object. Another witness in Socorro reported hearing a roar and seeing an egg-shaped object rising into the air and heading southwest. These corroborating accounts, while less detailed than Zamora's, supported the basic facts of his report and made a hoax or hallucination much less likely. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the scientific consultant to Project Blue Book and a former UFO skeptic who had spent years explaining sightings as misidentifications of natural phenomena, traveled to Socorro to investigate the case personally. Hynek was an astronomer from Northwestern University, a serious scientist who had debunked hundreds of UFO reports with conventional explanations. But the Zamora case troubled him deeply. After interviewing Zamora and examining the evidence, Hynek told the press that he could find no conventional explanation for what had occurred. He was particularly impressed by Zamora's credibility and the physical traces left at the site. In his official report to the Air Force, Hynek concluded that the Socorro incident was one of the most puzzling cases he had ever encountered, and he could not explain it away as a misidentification or hoax. Project Blue Book officially classified the Socorro incident as unknown, one of only a small percentage of cases that couldn't be explained after thorough investigation. This classification was significant because it came from the Air Force's own investigation program, not from civilian UFO enthusiasts. The military itself admitted it had no explanation for what Lonnie Zamora had witnessed in the New Mexico desert. If you're still listening to this incredible account of Sergeant Lonnie Zamora's encounter, please subscribe to America's UFO Legacy, because we're dedicated to bringing you the most thoroughly researched and compelling UFO cases from the golden age of sightings, and your subscription helps us continue preserving these important pieces of American history for future generations who deserve to know what really happened in our skies. The investigation continued for months, with various theories proposed and discarded.
Some suggested it was a test of a lunar landing module, since NASA was developing the Apollo program at the time and White Sands was involved in aerospace testing. However, NASA officials stated that no lunar lander tests were conducted in that area on that date, and the description didn't match any known lander design. The lunar module had legs, yes, but it was much larger than what Zamora described, made completely different sounds, and would never have been tested so close to a populated area without proper warnings and airspace restrictions. Others suggested college students from New Mexico Tech, located in Socorro, had perpetrated an elaborate hoax using a hot air balloon or some contraption designed to fool the police. Several tech students were questioned, and while some admitted they had considered pulling pranks on the police, none could explain how they would have created an object that left deep impressions in hard ground, burned vegetation hot enough to still be smoldering minutes later, produced a roar loud enough to be heard a mile away, and then flew away at high speed in front of a trained police officer. The logistics of such a hoax seemed far more improbable than the alternate explanation that something genuinely unusual had landed in the desert. The psychological impact on Lonnie Zamora was profound and immediate. He became overnight a national figure, featured in newspapers and magazines across the country, his name synonymous with one of the most credible UFO encounters on record. But unlike many who seek fame from UFO sightings, Zamora found the attention deeply uncomfortable. He was a private man who valued his reputation and his quiet life in Socorro, and suddenly he was besieged by reporters, investigators, curiosity seekers, and skeptics, all demanding his time and questioning his sanity. He gave interviews reluctantly, always maintaining that he had simply reported what he saw, nothing more, nothing less. He didn't claim to know what the object was. He never said it was extraterrestrial. He just described what happened and let others draw their own conclusions. His humility and consistency made his account all the more credible to those who studied the case. In the years following the incident, Zamora largely withdrew from public discussion of the event. He continued his work with the Socorro Police Department, eventually retiring after many years of service, and he rarely spoke about that April afternoon unless specifically asked. Friends and colleagues noted that he never wavered in his account, never embellished the story, never tried to profit from his experience. When pressed, he would simply say that he knew what he saw, he reported it honestly, and he wished people would just leave him alone to live his life. This reluctance to seek attention or profit from the incident further enhanced his credibility among serious researchers who recognized that hoaxers and attention seekers typically behaved very differently. The physical evidence from the Socorro landing site was analyzed by multiple laboratories and institutions. The soil samples from the landing marks showed compression consistent with heavy weight, but no chemical residue that would indicate conventional rocket fuel or propellant. The burned vegetation showed heat damage, but no accelerant residue that would suggest gasoline or other common fuels had been used. Radiation tests on the site showed no elevated levels beyond normal background radiation. Everything pointed to something physical and real having been present at the site, something that generated intense heat and significant weight, but nothing that matched known aircraft or terrestrial technology of that era. The Air Force closed Project Blue Book in 1969, concluding that UFOs posed no threat to national security and that there was no evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. However, the Socorro incident remained in the official files as an unexplained case, and subsequent declassification of Project Blue Book documents revealed that investigators privately considered the Zamora sighting one of the most puzzling and credible in their entire database. Memos between Air Force officers showed genuine confusion and concern about what Zamora had encountered, with no satisfactory conventional explanation ever being agreed upon. Decades after the incident, researchers continued to study the Socorro case, and new details occasionally emerged. Some investigators claim to have identified the student pranksters responsible, pointing to deathbed confessions and circumstantial evidence, but these claims were never substantiated and conflicted with the physical evidence and timeline. Other researchers proposed more exotic explanations, including secret military projects, dimensional portals, or time travelers from Earth's future testing technology in the past. Each theory had its proponents and detractors, but none could definitively prove what Lonnie Zamora had seen that Friday afternoon in April 1964. The town of Socorro eventually embraced its place in UFO history, recognizing that the incident had put their small desert community on the map in a unique way. A historical marker was placed near the site of the landing, and the town began hosting an annual UFO festival celebrating the Zamora encounter and New Mexico's rich history of unusual aerial phenomena. The festival attracts UFO enthusiasts from around the world who come to walk the desert arroyo where Zamora saw the object, to hear lectures about the incident, and to pay homage to one of the most documented UFO landings in American history. Lonnie Zamora passed away in November 2009 at the age of 76, taking with him any final secrets about what he might have seen or thought about the incident in his later years. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his long service to Socorro and noted, almost as an afterthought, that he was known for the 1964 UFO sighting that had brought international attention to the town.
Those who knew him said he remained consistent until the end, never changing his story, never admitting to any hoax or misidentification, simply insisting that he had seen what he had seen and reported it honestly. His death marked the end of an era for UFO research, as one of the most credible witnesses to a close encounter was no longer available to answer questions or defend his account. The legacy of the Socorro incident extends beyond Zamora himself. The case became a benchmark for evaluating UFO reports, a standard against which other sightings were measured. Researchers would ask, does this witness have the credibility of Lonnie Zamora? Is the physical evidence as compelling as the Socorro landing traces? Are there multiple independent witnesses, as there were in Socorro? The case demonstrated that UFO sightings weren't always made by unreliable witnesses with dubious motives, but sometimes by trained observers with impeccable reputations who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by reporting what they had seen. This raised uncomfortable questions for skeptics who preferred to dismiss all UFO reports as misidentifications or hoaxes, because the Socorro case didn't fit neatly into those categories. The incident also influenced popular culture's depiction of UFOs and alien craft. The egg-shaped design that Zamora described became a common motif in UFO literature and art, and the detail about landing gear or supports became a standard feature in subsequent UFO reports. Skeptics pointed to this as evidence of cultural contamination, arguing that later witnesses unconsciously incorporated details from the famous Socorro case into their own accounts. Believers countered that perhaps Zamora's sighting was simply one of many similar craft being observed, and that consistency across multiple independent reports actually strengthened the case for genuine phenomena rather than weakening it. The scientific community remained divided on the Socorro incident, as it did on the UFO phenomenon generally. Some scientists, like Dr. Hynek, became convinced that something genuinely anomalous was occurring and deserved serious study. Others maintained that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and that eyewitness testimony, no matter how credible, and ambiguous physical traces were not sufficient to prove extraterrestrial visitation. The debate continues to this day, with new generations of researchers examining the old evidence through modern analytical techniques and reaching conflicting conclusions. What cannot be disputed is that on April 24, 1964, something unusual happened in a desert arroyo outside Socorro, New Mexico. A respected police officer encountered something that defied conventional explanation, left physical traces that were documented and photographed, and maintained his account consistently for 45 years until his death. Whether that something was an extraterrestrial craft, a secret military project, an elaborate hoax that somehow fooled trained investigators, or something else entirely, remains an open question. The Socorro incident stands as one of the most compelling and well-documented close encounter cases in UFO history, a case that continues to challenge our assumptions about what is possible and what might be visiting our planet from beyond Earth. As we reflect on Lonnie Zamora's experience more than 60 years later, we're left with profound questions about the nature of reality and our place in the cosmos. Was Zamora one of the lucky or unlucky few to encounter visitors from another world? Did he witness technology so advanced that it appeared magical to a mid-20th century observer? Or is there a perfectly mundane explanation that has eluded researchers for decades? The truth remains elusive, hidden somewhere in the New Mexico desert, where a police officer once stood face to face with the unknown and lived to tell about it. Before we close this remarkable chapter, I want to hear from you. What do you think Lonnie Zamora really saw that April afternoon? Do you believe it was an alien spacecraft, a secret military project, an elaborate prank that somehow fooled trained investigators, or something else entirely? Share your theories and thoughts in the comments below, because exploring these mysteries together helps us all think more deeply about the unexplained phenomena in our world. And I personally read every comment you leave. The Socorro incident remains relevant today as we enter a new era of UFO disclosure and investigation. Recent admissions by military officials that they have encountered unidentified aerial phenomena with capabilities beyond known technology echo the concerns raised by the Socorro case decades ago. Modern investigators, equipped with advanced analytical tools, continue to study the old cases like Socorro, looking for patterns and evidence that earlier researchers might have missed. The story of Lonnie Zamora reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary events happen to the most ordinary people, and that truth can be stranger than fiction in ways that challenge us everything we think we know about our universe and our place within it.